Have you ever just felt like you had to grow up way before you were ready? You know, that sense that your childhood was cut short, not because of one big thing, but because this feeling of responsibility just sort of crept in. Well, it turns out there's a real psychological framework for that feeling, and we're going to dive into it right now.
Let's just sit with that for a second. Some children don't lose their childhood suddenly. They outgrow it, quietly. I think that's the key part. It's not this loud, dramatic event. It's this gradual, almost silent shift where you just accept a role that was never meant for you simply because it felt like nobody else was going to. So, does that hit home for you at all? I mean, really think back. Can you remember a moment when you looked around your family or your situation and just had that quiet thought that if things were going to be okay, you were the one who had to make them okay? It's that feeling of stepping up, not because you wanted to, but because it felt like you had no other choice. And this whole experience, well, we can call it a childhood outgrown. It really is a process, not a single moment in time. It usually starts with this subtle awareness. It's like a little hum in the background you can't quite ignore. You start noticing the cracks, the instability, the need for a steady hand when the actual adults around you seem to be struggling. It's that slow and honestly pretty lonely realization that things aren't quite right. And right after that realization comes the really heavy part. That steady hand, that responsible person, that person has to be you. It's that moment you kind of accept that you're not just a kid anymore, you're a caretaker. And that is an incredibly heavy weight to put on your own shoulders, especially when they're still so small. Now, this isn't just some vague feeling that people have. Psychology actually has a name for this whole experience. It's a real concept, and it helps put a frame around this entire dynamic.
And the term is parentification. Basically, it's a kind of a role reversal, where a child is put in a position of caring for a parent, or maybe a sibling, in a way that's just way beyond what's normal or healthy for their age.
And let's be super clear about this. We are not talking about being asked to take out the trash or help with the dishes. No, this is something much, much deeper and way more emotionally taxing. Right, so this is the absolute heart of it. Parentification is about being forced to become the emotional manager for the adults in your life. You end up being their confidant, their mediator, their emotional support system. You learn how to juggle complex adult emotions before you've even had a chance to figure out your own.
Okay, so what's really fascinating here is the long-term effect this has on someone. It can create this thing that psychologists call split maturity.
What happens is, this experience literally fractures your sense of self. It pulls you in two totally different directions at once. You have this part of you that's racing ahead into adulthood, but at the same time, the actual child part of you gets left behind. And that creates this deep, lasting internal conflict.
And this lays it out perfectly. On the outside, to everyone else, you look like the picture of wisdom and maturity. You're the responsible one, right? The one who can solve anyone's problems. But on the inside, it's a totally different story. There's this feeling of being emotionally empty, of being completely disconnected from what you need because you've spent your whole life focused on everyone else. You literally forget how to just be a kid.
So this brings us to the central paradox that really defines the life of someone who went through this. It's this constant state of being both incredibly capable and, at the same time, deeply unfulfilled. On one hand, you grow up to be unbelievably competent. I mean, you can probably handle a crisis with a level of calm that freaks other people out. You can organize, you can manage pressure, because you had to learn how to navigate rough seas from a really young age.
And you're also deeply, sometimes almost compulsively responsible. You become the person everyone relies on, the one they know will never, ever drop the ball. That sense of duty just becomes a core part of who you are.
But despite all of that competence on the outside, there's so often this persistent feeling of hollowness, a sense that something really important is missing. And that's because your own emotional growth was put on pause. You built this incredibly strong exterior, but the interior was never really nurtured. So as we start to wrap up, what's the big takeaway here? How should we really think about this kind of premature wisdom?
At the end of the day, this isn't really a story about being advanced or mature for your age. It's a story about carrying a burden. It's about the weight of shouldering adult anxieties and emotional problems long before you were ever meant to.
And that leaves us with one final question to think about. What really happens when wisdom shows up before childhood even gets a chance to finish? It's the great paradox of the old soul, the child who became an adult way too soon. And that's something worth reflecting on.